Welcome to, again, Attorney Steinhauser and Attorney Warden. Thank you so much for being here today, and we're really excited to learn from you.
Well, I'm Rebecca Steinhauser. I am a managing attorney, actually, of the Healthcare and Public Benefits Group at ABLE, and the Medical Legal Partnership is one of our big projects that's within that group. But we handle not only public benefits cases through that project, we handle any kind of cases that will impact children and that we think will improve social determinants of health. So it could be a health care and public benefit case, but it could be a housing case, it could be a custody case, it could be an education case. So we just do a broad range of legal cases through that project. I'm going to let Joe introduce himself.
Thank you, Becky. And thank you, Angela, for following up with us. And we're just so happy to be here. And anytime we can talk about our projects when it's related to kinship caregivers, whom obviously over the last many years, we've seen a significant rise in kinship caregivers obtaining legal custody or just having children placed with them. And all the various issues that surround that, as far as, well, how do I get legal custody? Do I need a guardianship? What about their education? They were doing poorly in school. They were on Social Security, and now I'm being told they're being terminated, which is where we're going to go with this here today. So, just for all our kinship caregivers out there, we just want you to know that there is certainly legal help available, and this is one very important area we're going to be, or Becky's going to be talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you here.
I also wanted to give a shout out to Jennifer Moog, who is sharing my screen for me because among my talents is not technology. So
Hey, Jennifer.
I always do better if somebody else is handling the tech side of things. So let's get started. I'm glad that everybody could come out today. So I was going to talk about children's SSI cases because I know a lot of the kids that we see, they've been through a lot. You know, a lot of them are placed with grandparents or other relatives, and sometimes they haven't had proper medical care. Sometimes they've been exposed to drugs. And a lot of times that they have disabilities, and so they may need SSI benefits. And so I wanted to start out talking about poverty. So poverty is really interlinked with poor health. So just on average, you're probably not surprised to hear that people with higher socioeconomic statuses have better health outcomes. Why? Because they can usually afford the things that make us healthier in life, better housing, transportation, a better education. So that poverty really does impact kids' health. So psychological, social, and economic adversity in childhood can have long-term consequences for health. So that's why at the Medical Legal Partnership, we try to attack those problems when kids are young so that we can improve health outcomes early, so that when they're adults, they're more likely to be healthier. So medical conditions, disabilities, and poor health can affect your ability to keep a job or to maintain your expenses. I don't know why our research study is so old there. I should have changed it, but I suspect that the numbers are probably even higher now in 2024, that illness or medical bills are really linked to a lot of debt and bankruptcies and specifically. So these are the factors that influence a child's health. So school discipline and special education. So that's why we take education cases. Employment and income. So that would be the SSI cases that we handle or unemployment cases. Immigrant status. So Joe and I don't do immigration cases, but we have an entire immigration unit that we can, those are very specialized cases that we can refer those cases to for representation because we are seeing more people, particularly in Springfield, there's a big Haitian population. And of course, in Dayton, we see immigrants of all types, and they may need assistance. So healthcare and food access, again, those tend to be public benefit. And housing and utility cases, so those are, you know, sometimes we'll see eviction cases. A lot of times we see people living in very poor housing, people living with mold or lead or water leaks, just all kinds of things that can impact a child's health. So we would take a case there to help a child. So SSI, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is a program that provides a payment to an individual. That could be an individual with a disability who's over 18, but it also can be a child under 18. The rules for SSI are that you not only have to have a disability, but you also have to show that you're very low income and that your resources are very limited. So it's a minimum monthly check that's paid to the individuals who are qualified to receive it. The maximum benefit this year is $943, so it's certainly not a program you're going to get rich on. And you can see those benefit amounts varying. So if somebody's living in a situation where they're not paying all of their what they call fair share of expenses in the household, they can reduce that SSI benefit by up to a third. So we see that happen as well. There's a very low resource limit. So for an individual or a person, a child living with one parent, that resource limit's 2,000. It's 3,000 for a child living with two parents. So again, they don't allow you to have very much. I should mention that many resources are exempt. So if you own a house and you're living in it, that is exempt. If you have one car, it doesn't really matter the value of the car, that's going to be exempt. Furniture and things in your house is exempt. So there are a lot of things they still allow you to own that they don't count as resources. So the purpose of the program was to ensure that kids who do have disabilities have a minimum level of income. So it provides it because a lot of those kids that have disabilities, as we know, and I don't know how many of you have custody of a child with a disability, but a lot of times those kids need extra things, and those things cost money. They may be things that aren't covered by Medicaid for some reason, and you might just have to expend a little bit of extra money. So this is one way that you can help, you know, cushion that financial responsibility that you've taken on for that child. So the definition of disability is a little bit different for kids and adults. So the adults, that's a completely different training. So because adults have the responsibility to work, so Social Security has to look at work responsibility, you know, work experience and capabilities, which is not what they need to look at for children. So for adults, they're just looking at, are you able to engage in what they call substantial gainful activity? That's defined by a dollar amount, $1,500 monthly. Do you have a disability that prevents you from engaging in that substantial gainful activity? And will that disability last at least 12 months, or is it expected to result in death? For kids under 18, it's different, again, because we're not looking at the ability to work, but we're looking at whether that child meets a medical listing. And we'll talk a little bit later about what the listings are, or whether they whether they have an impairment that causes marked or severe functional limitations. So very different process for kids. So just to go briefly over the substantial gainful activity process. So when they look, because they do actually have to look at this for kids too, because sometimes kids do have income, earned income. So they're looking at whether that income the child has, whether they're basically a dollar amount under $1,500, whether they're doing it for pay or profit. And I should also mention, it's $1,500 if you're not blind. If you are blind, there is a different SGA amount, and that's because there have been blind lobby groups that lobbied for a different amount and got that amount, and so their amount is $2,590 a month. So if you're working at that SGA level, they're automatically going to determine you are not disabled. Again, most of the folks that come to us, they're not working at that level, so this is usually not an issue. Another thing that they look at is, do you have a severe impairment? So a severe impairment is just any impairment that's causes some problem with your functional limitations. So, for instance, if the child has ADHD, so we know that ADHD can have cause problems with concentration or sometimes behavior. So that's usually enough to show that somebody has a severe impairment. Now, when you're looking at a listing is set, there are a set of medical criteria for the most severe impairments, and they've got 14 different listings. And if you're curious about the listings, you can either Google Social Security medical listings, and they'll pop right up, or you can go to the Social Security website. They are listed online. And so you can look them up by category. So they have like category number 1 is musculoskeletal impairment. So everything from arthritis on down can be found in there, and they'll tell you how bad you have to be to meet that listing. Now, usually the people that meet the listings are the worst of the worst. We don't tend to see them coming to our office because a lot of times those are the obvious ones that Social Security will award right away. Although sometimes we see them come in, they've either slipped through the cracks or they've become worse as their case has been pending at the Social Security office. So automatically, if you can show you meet a listing, as long as you meet that income and asset test, you're going to be automatically approved for benefits. But like I said, most people don't fit into that category that come to our office. So we have to look at the functional equivalence test. And so in that test, they're going to look at the child's functioning when it's compared to the functioning level for a typical child of that age. And so there's different categories. So one of the categories is moving and manipulating objects. Another one is acquiring and using information. Another is attending and concentrating. So they look at those categories, and health is another one, just general health and well-being. And, they'll look and see, well, how is this child functioning? And are they functioning like a typical, say, 10-year-old? So to give you an example, I have a client who's actually just turned 13. So your average 13-year-old can be left in the living room while mom goes in to do dishes. This child cannot. Her behavior can be very off the wall. She can be violent. She can try to escape out the door. She's a child that needs to be monitored 24/7, really, for her own safety. for other people's safety. She's also not, she also can't always go to the bathroom on her own, so she has to be reminded to go to the bathroom. So those are all things that, you know, maybe at 2 years old that would be average, but not when you're 13. So that was good evidence to show that, you know what, this child is not functioning at the level of a typical child her age. She was very extreme, so she's an easy person to get on SSI benefits. So they also look at any help that the child might receive from family, teachers, or others to do things. So sometimes, as I mentioned, a child might need to be prompted to do something. Even if they're able to do it, if you constantly have to prompt them to do that activity, it doesn't really indicate that they can do that activity on their own. So that's another important thing to look at. We also look at very structured settings. So if the child's doing very well, but they're in, like I have some kids that are in what they call self-contained classrooms. Those classrooms are very small. The kids get a lot of very close, often one-on-one attention there. And so if they're doing well there, it doesn't necessarily indicate they can do well in a traditional classroom. So if they're getting a lot of accommodations and extra assistance, that's something that should be made clear to Social Security when they're doing their analysis. Um, so that could be anything like a special education class. It could be maybe they're in a special residential facility. They have more structure at home. They need more attention and guidance to do the things that they do during a regular day. So all of this information is very important. So when you're handling an SSI case, they'll look at any and all evidence. Some evidence is valued more highly than others. So they will value evidence from a doctor. I will say they will give it more weight. And this is according to the Social Security regulations. They will give more weight to the testimony of a doctor, even if it's a doctor that has just treated the client for 30 minutes during a consultative exam, then they will to, say, a certified nurse practitioner who is the treating provider for that child for the past 3 or 4 years. So they changed the regulations about 7 years ago. So it does make it very difficult to provide evidence from individuals that are not doctors if you have some counterbalancing evidence from a Social Security doctor. Very unfortunate. So they also look at the child's ability to perform activities independently. So how do they do their ADLs? Like I said, do they need prompting to do showers? Do they need assistance with showers? Do they need help getting dressed? Do they need extra supervision to prevent harm? So sometimes a child may be functioning a little bit better because they have an assistive device. So we have clients, our younger clients that have things like wheelchairs or other things that help them to navigate. Well, that doesn't mean that they can navigate around like your average child. They definitely still have challenges, and those need to be made clear to Social Security. So the 6 functioning domains that they look at are acquiring and using information. So that's just how does a child learn? Are they able to learn in the same way? Can they process information like another child of their age? Attending and completing tasks. So can they focus in school and concentrate and take in the information that's being taught to them? How do they interact and relate with others? So sometimes our kids don't relate very well to anybody, or they're an older child that's rather immature, and so they have very young playmates rather than playmates of their own age. How do they move about and manipulate objects? So can they walk, run, and jump, like climb like an average child, or do they have challenges? Can they do their ADLs once they're at a certain age? And how is their health? So we also look at that. We've got a child right now through our Dayton MLPC that she missed about 60 days of school last year, and it's because she has severe anxiety, which they had to accommodate by doing homeschooling with her. So that definitely, I think, shows that she's extremely limited in that health and physical well-being category. So to meet the qualifications for SSI, under the functional limitations, you have to show that you have a marked limitation in 2 functional domains or an extreme limitation in a 1. So, and it doesn't, by saying extreme, it doesn't mean the child has a complete lack of functioning, just to define it scientifically, it's 3 standard deviations below the mean or more. That can sometimes be shown by professional psychological testing. But otherwise, sometimes the judges are just looking at the opinion of a teacher, like, how do you think this child's functioning? Or the opinion of their family doctor. So what's normal just kind of depends on the child's age. So for a child between 3 and 6, they're going to look at, can they rhyme words? Can they point out colors? Can they ask sentences or use sentences to ask questions? Um, can they focus on fun activities? So if you're talking about attending and completing tasks, interacting and relating with others at this age, they should be able to develop friendships with other kids. They should be able to speak clearly so that they can talk with other people, and they should be at this point capable of showing affection to their parents or other people in their life. Moving about and manipulating objects, they should be able to walk or run, climb stairs, use zippers or buttons, and put on their shoes and other clothing. Health and physical well-being. So you're going to look at things like, do they miss school a lot due to illness? Do they have physical limitations? So some of our kids are on medications that might make them tired. Maybe they're falling asleep in school, so we see things like that. Do they have very frequent medical appointments? I think I mentioned the caring for yourself. Can they do those ADLs? Do they understand what's safe and what's not safe? We have some kids that just have a complete disregard for safety and just not a real good understanding of what's safe or not safe. They'll run into the street. Even when they're old enough to know better, they'll just talk to anybody, try to get in people's cars. So if you see things like that, that's an indication the child's not functioning as an average child. So in this example here about Avery, Avery's a 7-year-old boy with a diagnosis of autism and anxiety and has trouble developing friendships with other kids and prefers to be alone. He has frequent behavioral issues at school and has been disciplined for hitting or distracting other kids in the classroom. He has to be supervised at all times or he'll run in the street or engage in other unsafe activities. He receives assistance from a one-on-one aide at school and spends a portion of his day in a special ed classroom. Does he have Does he have limitations in any domain of functioning? What do you think? Anybody have any guesses?
I mean, I would definitely say yes.
Yes. So yeah, even if you can't point out the exact functional category, I would say he appears to have limitations in the category of interacting and relating to other people, in the caring for oneself, in the attending and concentrating. You know, it doesn't address learning, but it's usually my experience that when a child's not focusing in school, they're not learning well either. So you could probably make an argument that he's limited in at least 4 of those categories. And so the next one, Ava, is an 11-year-old girl with sickle cell, and she has frequent illnesses and hospitalizations, and often must be homeschooled to prevent exposure to viruses or infections. And she's falling behind in schoolwork and might not be able to advance to 6th grade next year. Does she have any limitations? You're right. She would be limited in the health and well-being. Um, and arguably it doesn't, the question doesn't address whether she was doing well in school before. So I think she's having learning issues, but those are probably linked to this health and well-being. But if she's that sick, and this is actually based on one of our real cases, then you can make an argument that she's extremely limited. In that case, we did get this child on the SSI benefits. So if a child gets denied, I'll mention that when you initially apply for benefits, very, very common to get denied. Don't let that stop you. Social Security at its initial levels is not very likely to approve somebody unless they meet the listings, and it's a very obvious case. So it's quite frequent that people get denied. Just make sure that you appeal that denial. That's usually where we step in at ABLE after the person has been denied. There is a 60-day deadline to file appeals at each level. That can be extended for good cause depending on what's going on, but I would rather you just get the appeal filed in time, because you never know whether they're going to grant you a good cause, and if they don't, then you have to start again at the very beginning. So these are the levels of appeal. So if you're denied the first time, you can file what's called a reconsideration. And then if that gets denied, you can file to the administrative law judge. And that's again where we step in, because the administrative law judge, it's a hearing. The vast majority of those hearings now take place either by Zoom or by telephone. So, and this is your chance to get a little more information in front of somebody who's actually going to listen. The administrative law judge is should be impartial, not always, depending on who you get, but should be an impartial person who just is looking at the evidence, listening to the testimony. If the child's old enough, they may want the child to testify. Otherwise, they'll have the parent testify. You can have other people testify if you think that's necessary, therapists or teachers. And then the administrative law judge issues a decision that gets issued in writing, not usually at the hearing. It can take a while to get a decision in writing too. Sometimes it can take several months. If the decision's favorable, great. That means the child's going to get the benefits. If not, there are further appeal rights. There is a body in Virginia that looks at those cases, and they're no longer called the Appeals Council. I should have changed that. They have a new name. I don't remember the name offhand. They just recently changed that, but They are the ones that review ALJ decisions. Frankly, not many of these get overturned. And they rarely get overturned. What sometimes happens is they'll say that the judge missed something, didn't do something correctly, and it gets referred back. It's what they call remanded, meaning it's sent back for another hearing, which again, that can take a while to get another hearing. So, and if that is not successful, then you can go to federal court, and those really take a long time. Only done a few of those, and the last one I did, I think it took 5 years for us to get a hearing. So yeah, it's not a quick process. But we did get an awful lot of back benefits from when that case was pending. So another thing to look out for is if your child's already on SSI, is anybody who gets on SSI goes through a continuing disability review. They call that a CDR for short. And that is Social Security is going to look and see, are they still disabled? Have they improved? Some conditions do improve, so they will periodically review medical evidence to make sure the child's still disabled. Usually that's once every 3 years, although it doesn't tend to run timely. So it may be more like every 5 years. At age 18, they are supposed to review that child using the adult standards. So again, that doesn't always happen right at age 18, but they are going to look and see whether they still meet the standards, given the fact they're now not a child, but an adult. So when they're looking at the case, they look at, has there been medical improvement? And sometimes what we see is maybe one thing has improved. Like a good example is a lot of our kids get on benefits because they have a speech impairment that's really quite severe when they're young. And then after therapy and as they get older, their condition improves. But in the meantime, maybe now they have other issues. Maybe now they've been diagnosed with autism, and that wasn't the case when they were originally approved for benefits. So it's important to let Social Security know about all of the other medical conditions that child has, because just because one impairment has improved doesn't mean that all impairments have improved, or that they don't have additional impairments that weren't in existence at the time they were originally put on benefits. So that's a whole process that they'll go through to see whether has the child improved. If so, are there any other impairments? How are they functioning in those categories? Have they been, are there categories where they're extreme or marked, and how many of those categories are extreme or marked? And if they do that informal look at the case, the child may receive from Social Security a notice saying, you are no longer disabled. We are proposing to terminate your benefits. You can appeal that. So you can and should appeal that. And then you can request a hearing in front of the judge and argue that your child still does meet those requirements of SSI. So it's always helpful to get your latest medical evidence, to get assistance from the children's doctors or teachers with providing evidence. We send out what are called functional capacity questionnaires, so to teachers or to doctors, so we can get their opinion as to how the child's functioning. And I think that's always helpful to give that information to a judge. So that's what happens sometimes once the child is on SSI. So that's children's SSI in a nutshell. Did Anybody have questions? I know there were some comments going by in the chat, and I'm not real good at looking at the chat while I'm trying to talk, so I don't know if there were specific questions.
What about if you get benefits and they lower the amount of benefits?
So they lower the amount for various reasons, and usually, and they're not always right. Let me add that. Sometimes they'll lower the amount because with children's SSI, they do what's called deeming. So, parents have a responsibility to support their children financially. So they look at a parent's income. And so if a parent's income goes up, that child's SSI is likely to go down. Or if there's some other income that comes in, if there's some child support that comes in, then that's going to could reduce that child's SSI payment. So they're always looking at that. And I should say deeming is a very complex process. They use a formula. That formula depends on how many people are in the household. Are other kids receiving benefits? Is only this child receiving benefits? What other income is available? So all of that kind of gets thrown in the mix to determine what the child's SSI payment should be. But if you see that payment go down, it's for one of two reasons. Usually it's either there's more income in the household or they think there's more income, or there's an overpayment, which are very, very frequent, unfortunately, under SSI program because of how they pay out SSI. They're always paying out 2 months behind. So even if people faithfully report income, it can create overpayments. So if you see the check going down, if you have an overpayment, Social Security should have notified you of that. And there's a process to ask for a waiver, which is a forgiveness of the overpayment. If they don't forgive it, then they have the right to withhold 10% of the benefit, but you can ask for less to be withheld. Under SSI, you can ask for as low as $10. So, and they automatically assume under SSI that you don't have the ability to afford to repay at the rate somebody else would. Different if it's SSI. Like, yes, they should send a letter if you have an overpayment saying you have an overpayment. There should be an explanation as to how it happened. They should break it down by the month. That doesn't always happen like it should. And
Oh,
so people
okay.
don't understand, because I love when they send those letters out because it really does lay out the math and it explains, this is how we calculate income. We give you a $20 deduction, then we give you a $65 deduction, then we divide that in half, and that's the income we count. And so this is what we counted here for you. And so this is what your payment should have been as compared to what you really got. But they don't always consistently send those full explanation letters to people. And so it's hard for us to advise people I mean, usually if people say, yeah, I was working and I can get their paychecks and I can tell them, okay, yeah, this is what you should have gotten, because they don't, with disability, it's different. Like if you earn more than you should with disability, you're not entitled to a check, but with SSI, they just gradually reduce the check. Um, and so, but they shouldn't be just withholding an entire check. They're not allowed to do that under
Yeah.
SSI. They're not even allowed to do that under disability anymore. They used to be able to. They passed some new regulations this year that cap the amount they can withhold for anyone's check to 10% of the 10% of the amount of the check. Which is great because, we would sometimes have clients call and say, they withheld my entire check. I can't pay my rent. It was really quite common that they would do that sometimes without notice. So yes, ideally they should send notice. They don't always do that though. I advise people, if they're working, report every day, not every day. That would be excessive. No, every 30 days, report what you're earning. There is an SSI telephone reporting system now,
Right.
and they'll give you like a confirmation number when you call and report earnings. So I think a lot of people have used that, and that's been helpful. I could, Angela, if there are no questions, just mention how folks can get in touch with us.
Yeah,
So
that'd be great.
I don't know if do we have people from different counties other than
Yes.
Montgomery here? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So we handle 32 counties. Angela, we can get the county map to you. So we're handling just about like over a third of the counties in Ohio. I see that somebody's in Allen County. The Allen's not one of our MLPC counties. Our MLPC counties are in Montgomery and in Lucas. But if you see a provider in Montgomery or Lucas, even if you're in another county, we can help. And we are open to some kids' cases in our different practice group areas, depending on what the situation is. So, but if you're a Montgomery or Lucas County client, we do have referral forms. Joe can provide you with a referral form from Do we have any Lucas County, I should ask? Then we can provide you with the referral forms for Lucas County and
But there's the map.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Jen, awesome.
Yes, those are all of our I thought, and usually we take referrals through medical providers normally. But that's how we get most of our referrals from the MLPC. But if you had general questions also, you're always welcome to reach out and email us, and we can let you know whether it's a case we might be able to take.
Awesome. And I think your contact information was on that last slide, so I'll be sharing.
Yeah.
And it's in the chat too. That's
Okay.
great.
And there's Joe's email in the chat.
Thank you. And so I guess a last question in terms of, like, you talked about sometimes having to push back or do an appeal with disability, and I'm sure other things as well. Do you recommend like trying to get legal representation if possible to do that, or is that something that
Definitely. If you can get legal representation, get legal representation, because it is challenging to try to weave your way through Social Security and all that they ask and all the changing regulations and what to say to a judge when you're in a hearing. So I mean, do people represent themselves and get benefits? Yeah, but it's going to be a much smoother process if you have representation. That being the case, it's not always possible. We can't take every case. We have very limited funding. We have limited capacity to take all the cases that come our way. You can always see if you can get a private attorney to represent you. You'd have to find one that does kids cases. There are fewer that take kids cases than the adult cases, just because frankly, they're more challenging than adult cases are. And so you might not find a lot of attorneys that will take the cases. And if they take a case, they are going to take probably 30% of your retroactive money as their payment. Whereas we're not permitted to take any part of your retroactive payment. So if we do win your case, that retroactive award is all yours.
Wow. Rachel had a question for your services. Do you all help with FMLA as a case?
I don't do a lot with that, frankly.
Not generally.
It
I think
occasionally will come up on unemployment cases, but not usually in any other context.
Yeah, I think sometimes with kinship care it can come up because you have to like prove custody or whatever in order.
Yeah, right.
Everything can be a little bit more challenging, I think.
Yes, for sure.
Well, thank you all. This was so helpful. And thank you all who could join today. Like I said, I know legal information, it can be hard to come by. So we're just really grateful for all that your organization does and your heart towards kinship care. A lot of people don't even know too much about kinship care, but it sounds like you've had so many experiences working with families and advocating for them. So
absolutely.
yeah, thank you for all the work
Yes.
that you're doing. Maybe in the future we'll be able to welcome you back here, but
Okay.
Absolutely.
well, and I appreciate all the great questions as well.
Yes. Well, have a great day, everybody.
Good touch, Ange.
Okay.
Take care.